How you think is the most important thing about you.
Welcome to F1 Session 12. This is another class about learning how to think in the kingdom of God. As young disciples, this is probably more than anything else. This is the battle that we tend to go through over and over and over, is learning how to think in the kingdom of God. If you're like me, so often there are things that go on in my world, so many things that go on in my experience that don't match up with the way that I think. And so I have this conflict that constantly seems to go on. Either I want to do one thing, but I tend to not do it, or I don't want to do something and I tend to do it more than I want to. There seems to be this conflict. Oh, wretched man that I am, who can save me from this body of death that I feel like I live in? It's so frustrating. And if I'm not careful, it will eventually lead to me quitting. That's what people do. People quit Christianity, not because they don't believe anymore. It's just that's the only way they have to reconcile. I can't do it anymore. I keep trying to do it, but I just feel bad about myself because I can't do it. It's just going to be a whole lot easier if I just quit than to continue to fail in this thing. And again, that all comes simply from wrong thinking. So what we're going to continue to dive into as we get into Romans chapter 12, verses 12 and 13, you can see here that in these couple verses, what we're doing is talking about being joyful in hope, patient in affliction, we want to be faithful in prayer, and we want to be helpful in time of need, or we want to have hospitality in times of need. Now, as we walk through this session, what we're going to begin doing is looking at some alternatives to that, all right? And also, I want to talk quite a bit and see if we can get our head around the idea that this joyful patience, faithfulness, and helpfulness, guys, that's called the fruit of the Spirit. That's Galatians chapter 2 type of, or Galatians chapter 5, fruit of the Spirit. As opposed to me just trying to, okay, I'm now going to go out and be patient. I'm now going to go out and be hopeful. All right, well, good luck with that. That can be difficult when we just go out in our own strength and try to make that happen. But if we can, remember how this whole thing works. Remember Tough Bar, okay? Thoughts lead to our feelings. Our feelings are what develop into our belief systems. Our beliefs are what lead to our actions, and our actions determine our results. So, in looking at this tree here, let's say you and I are trees, and looking at this is very simple. Down here in the root system, these are our thoughts, the way we think. If our thoughts are right, the tree will be right. If our thoughts are healthy, the tree will be healthy. Our thoughts lead to our feelings. In here, feelings can so often become this trunk in our life, which I don't think that's necessarily wrong, all right? I mean, we are emotional beings. To become non-emotional, it just doesn't fit. And you become a robot. So we're not saying that we want to get rid of this thing. And feelings are very, very important. But feelings that are rooted in wrong thoughts can be very emotional and very up and down and crazy and non-understandable. All right? I don't know if that's a word or not. But these feelings then, as we've talked about, lead to our belief system. Things that we believe to be true. It's our conclusions. And then finally, our beliefs lead to the fruit. Like the little red things? It leads to the fruit. And the fruit, as we know, these are our actions. Okay? So if I want to have right actions, hopefully that's in the video, okay? If we want to have right actions, it all begins in having right thoughts. If we want righteous activity in our life, we need to have righteous thoughts in our life. And once again, guys, please be very careful not to get caught in the trap of just because I'm a Christian, I should have righteous thoughts. It doesn't happen that way. Just because I've asked Jesus into my heart doesn't mean that I have righteous thoughts. I have to be converted. I have to work out my salvation in fear and trembling. It's wonderful to have this free gift of salvation. But you guys, justification and sanctification are different things. We're justified through faith, but we are sanctified through the renewing of our mind, learning how to think. And again, as we learn how to think, it's just a natural process. Learn how to think, you will know the will of the Father, His good, pleasing, and perfect will in every situation. So again, as we walk through verses 12 and 13, I want you to understand that what we're talking about here is fruit in our life. And I want you, if you can, try not to take this as, here are more things you need to go do, as opposed to, here are more promises that are available to you as you begin to have a renewed mind that has been transformed. Okay, I mean, this is really, really important. Again, so often we don't get this. So many believers never learn how to think. They just come into the kingdom and then they try to just start doing kingdom things. But you have to learn how to do them. You have to learn how to think. The more you learn how to think, the more your thoughts line up with the thoughts of the Lord, the more you will find your ways become like the ways of the Lord. Okay? So that's what we're going to be diving into here in session 12 as we continue to learn how to think in the kingdom of God. So let's read our verses really quick. As you remember, you probably have them memorized. Again, hopefully you guys have been continuing to say that memory verse to one another. If you just said it at the very beginning of class, but you're not saying it anymore, then chances are pretty good you forgot it. All right? You kind of have to keep hammering that thing. But here we go. So we want to be sure that we are, or maybe let me say it this way. We want to know the promise that we will be joyful in hope, that we will be patient in affliction, that we will find ourselves being faithful in prayer. And it'll just be a natural thing that'll flow out of us that we will share with those that are in need as we practice hospitality. Okay? So that's how I'd like for us to take a look at these verses. They are promises that are available to us. So now rather than me saying, so how's your walk? How are you doing with that joy? And how are you doing with this? As if it's a list of something you're supposed to be doing. As if it's a task that you're trying to complete. What I want to do here is I simply want to ask you, how are you doing walking in the fulfillment of that promise? How are you doing in accepting that promise for you? Are you still finding that it's hard to be joyful in hope? Are you still finding that it's hard to be patient in affliction? Well, that's simply because you need to receive more of that promise. How do I receive more of that promise? By being renewed, all right? Being renewed over and over and expanding and expanding and expanding and expanding. Okay, so let's dive into this. First of all, I would encourage you, if you haven't already, have a little conversation. How are you doing with your joyfulness in the midst of hope? I know for me, a lot of times this idea of hope was I would hope that things would happen, but I was afraid that they weren't. I was afraid that they weren't going to happen in my life. I had all kinds of dreams and things, expectations, as we've talked about. I had all kinds of expectations that I wanted to see happen in my life, but I was afraid that they wouldn't. And so I would try to just, but I hope they do, 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 I hope they do. But there seemed to be this fear or this helplessness in the midst of hope, you know? And this is an alternative. Rather than being joyful in hope, because I'm not living in the promise of hope, I live in this thing of I'm trying to be hopeful, but I feel so helpless in the midst of that. Well, if it's the Lord's will, it'll happen. If it's not the Lord's will, it won't happen. And we'll just see. It's kind of out of my hands. I don't know. You know, I'm going to pray for you, but Lord, just have your way. Not my will, but your will. And I understand that. I get that. It's not just always me getting my way, but how unfortunate if I continue to live in this thing called hope with a feeling of helplessness all the time, or a doubtfulness. Rather than being hopeful, I'm doubtful. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I really hope it does. And so I can feel very helpless in this place of hope, rather than feeling joyful. So, how do you get to this place called joyful in the midst of hope? Are we joyful simply because we choose to be joyful? Hey, I'm going to be happy in the midst of this. You know, well, you can go that route, and there is a degree of choosing that's involved here. But that's a hard way to go. Remember, we want to be joyful in hope. It's not just joyful because we're hoping, but we want to be joyful in hope. The way that we obtain this fruit of joyfulness in the midst of hope is through a little thing called faith. Remember, Hebrews says that faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Okay, so remember this. It's the assurance of things hoped for. So in hope, the way that I become joyful in the midst of hope is that I am hoping in something that I know is going to happen. It's not that I'm hoping that something might happen, but it might not, and so I'm doubtful and helpless and fearful. My hope is in something that I know is going to happen. I have the assurance of things hoped for. It's the evidence of things not seen. You know, for so long in my life, see if you guys can pick this up, I had so many things that I was hoping for and things not seen. And what I lacked in my life was the assurance and evidence. Does that make sense? Let's take a look really quick. Kind of break that down here. We've got faith from Hebrews chapter 11. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for. And it is the evidence of things not seen. Again, we got hope for over here and things not seen over here. I spent so much of my life hoping for things, but not seeing them in my life. And so I would spend my time here, which led me to feeling helpless and afraid and scared that things weren't going to happen the way that I wanted them to happen. Man, it stunk. It was terrible. I lacked this thing called assurance and evidence in my life. Lord, expand my thinking so that I can begin to see assurance and evidence. Because when I begin to have assurance of things hoped for, that's where my joy is. I'm not just hoping for something that I don't know if it's going to happen, but I have found hope in something that I know is going to happen in my life. That's what being joyful in hope is all about. It's about putting my hope in things that I know is going to happen. Does that make sense? You guys following that? It's so important that we grasp that thing as opposed to just going out there and just choosing anything and everything to be hopeful for and just really hoping it's going to happen and finding ourselves living more and more in a life of things not seen and things hoped for and feeling a helplessness. You know, it's just kind of like, well, I hope God, because I have this idea of maybe God or maybe God will or maybe God won't, leads me to that place of finding it very difficult to have joy in the midst of hope. It's a real important concept for us to grasp. Faith is relationship with God. Okay, that's just another way. Anywhere you see faith in Bible, just insert relationship with God. A relationship with God is the assurance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Abraham was found righteous because of his relationship with God. Just any place you see faith, input relationship with the Lord. So how do I get more assurance? Increase my relationship with the Lord. How do I do that? Well, I know I can never outlove God. We've talked about this. So it all has to be initiated by Him. So Lord, my prayer becomes, Lord, expand my relationship with you. Expand my understanding. Increase my capacity to understand how much you love me and how much you care for me. And then just anticipate the Lord orchestrating your circumstance to show you your limits. And in the process or in that place of seeing your limits, submit to Him. Lord, thank you for showing me my limits. This is hard. But Lord, I want to press through this. Reveal to me where your heart is in the midst of this. I get to know the Lord, my relationship grows with the Lord. I have automatically fruit in my life of assurance and evidence. It's called the fruit of faith. And then I am able to be joyful in the midst of hope. Okay? You guys catching that? Hopefully that is making sense to you. Faith is the assurance and evidence. So much better than just hope in things not seen. Hope is good, but joyful in hope is even better because it is assurance in my life. I can be very hopeful in my future because I know that Jeremiah 29:11 is true. I haven't just heard it and agreed with it. I know that it is true. It has become part of my belief system, and therefore it influences the way that I act. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about suffering and affliction in our lives, okay? Once again, this concept is very important on this road of discipleship, on this road of personal development. We have to get an understanding. We have to look and interpret struggle and difficulty the right way. It's like going into the weight room and wanting to become stronger, but not really understanding how the weight room works. So you just get in there, everything's heavy, it's no fun, a lot of people screaming and yelling, there's so much sweat going on in there. People spitting and screaming and everything's heavy. Guys, I remember that in high school. We had a terrible weight room to begin with, but I hated going into the weight room because everything was always heavy. And then I went on to college and I played ball in college and I used to just, I hated going in there. Some people loved going into the weight room and getting huge and everything like that. I didn't, because everything was heavy. And as soon as things began to get a little bit lighter, what do? You add more weight. So things continued to be heavy all the time. It's just like, And again, as I told you, I didn't really grow up learning character, all right? I didn't grow up learning how to navigate and work through struggle. I used to just sidestep it, do the Heisman and just sidestep struggle and move around and go ahead and move on with my life. If I couldn't get around it, my response would simply be anger. It was your fault that I couldn't get around this struggle. So becoming patient in affliction, number one, we have to learn how to think about affliction correctly. Okay? We have to learn to think about affliction correctly. So what is the value of being patient in the midst of affliction? Again, if you want to stop the DVD here and have a little conversation, what do we gain by being patient in the midst of affliction rather than being impatient and trying to move through it quickly, or having the alternative to being patient in affliction, getting angry in the midst of affliction. Just getting mad because things are hard, because this person isn't doing that, or because that person did do this, or because the weather's not cooperating, or because God did this, or mom did that, or my boss did this, or my car's doing this, or the dog did that, or whatever it might be. Have we learned to be patient in the midst of affliction? Or is anger just under the surface? You guys, for me, I found that I could tap into anger really quick, because I was trying to control so much of my life on my own. Because I didn't understand this whole concept called submission. I didn't understand this whole process called the ways of the Lord and learning character and discipline. I just wanted to do what I wanted to do. And if you got in my way of trying to get someplace, I would probably get mad at you, because it was your fault that I couldn't get where I wanted to get. Have you found yourself there? Raise your hand if you can tap into anger pretty quick. All right, go ahead and raise your hand. It's okay. It's in a safe place. Again, to the degree or maybe to the measure that you can get angry, maybe to that same measure lets you know how much you're trying to control things. It's something to look into. It's something to process through with a mentor. Guys, again, I found that anger was one of my most common emotions. Most common emotions was anger in my life, because I was trying to control. As long as everything was in order, everything was fine. But as soon as something would get out of order, angry, frustration, sarcasm. What's together? Everybody's sarcastic when you get in? Yeah, sarcasm. All right, that's manipulation. Anybody know anything about manipulation? Trying to force things, trying to get people to do things out of fear, and so on. It's very interesting, the value of patience in the midst of suffering. Why the heck would I want to be patient? Don't I want to get through the suffering as quickly as possible? So have a little conversation about that. Okay, great. Now you may have already dove into this. Dove, is that the right word? Dived? I don't know what it is. But really quick, in James 1:4, we've talked about this already. We've got it in your notes here. But perseverance must finish its work so that you may be made perfect and complete and lacking in nothing. Remember talking about that earlier? It's possible for you to be perfect. It's possible for you to be made complete and lacking in nothing here on earth. But how does that happen? You got to go through the gate of affliction. You've got to go through the gate of difficulty. And you've got to be able to persevere. Remember, we learned that in Romans chapter 5. Affliction or suffering leads to perseverance. Perseverance leads to character. Character leads to hope. All right? And now I can be joyful in hope because I've learned character, because I've learned to persevere. Again, with me, when it came to suffering, I detoured right there. And I sidestepped it, and I would get angry and move off rather than learning how to persevere. Don't make that mistake. Make sure you've got somebody in your life that is helping you navigate through struggle and difficulty. Because you guys, most of life is going to be a struggle. Most of life is going to be a struggle. Now, up to this point, you may have been like me where, hey, up until like 25 years old, life was pretty good. Life was pretty smooth. There weren't a whole lot of things going on. Now, again, a lot of the struggles that came up, I sidestepped. But eventually, the Lord brought me to a place because I continued to say, Lord, search me and know me. Try me and know my wicked thoughts. Lead me in your way everlasting. You know, that's what David prayed. I thought it'd be a cool prayer. So I began to pray that. And eventually the Lord brought me to a place in my life where I could no longer sidestep suffering and difficulty. He knew what was in my heart. He knew what I wanted, and He knew the way to get it. He knew the path. And so He began to lead me down that road and finally put me in a place where I couldn't sidestep anymore. And that was when I began to learn patience in the midst of suffering and affliction. This is a very, very important for us to grab. Later on, as we move through the F1 here, you're going to find that there's going to be some more and more and more invitation to things that you might struggle with. Jesus did it with the 12, if you remember. Remember, it took Him quite a while before He said, follow me. But then even after that, it took Him quite a while before He started talking about the Son of Man must be crucified. It took Him a while before He started talking about actually dying. And then he introduced that topic, and then He said, you know, it's going to happen for you too. Unless you pick up your cross and follow me daily, you won't be able to follow me. It's a whole new concept for them. So, from these verses in Romans and in James, what do we learn about the connection between perseverance and endurance and their value in the midst of struggle and difficulty? Has there been something in your experience as you've been walking through the furnace that has been a struggle? How are you doing? Are you persevering? Are you enduring? Or are you blaming and shoving it aside and trying to get through it as quick as possible? How about just in your life, whether you're living at home or whether you're living at home still, or whether you're out on your own, whether you're married with kids, your job, your boss, your parents, your teachers, your coaches? How are you doing with walking through and embracing this fruit in your life called patience in the midst of affliction? Are you still like me, trying to avoid it at all costs? And when you can't avoid it, you just blame and point fingers and get mad at other people. Is that something worthy of you taking a look at and something worthy of you learning how to process? I think it is. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and make the statement. I don't think you will be able to grow and mature into the person that you were made to be, even into the person that you want to be, unless you learn how to navigate struggle and affliction. You know, there's a book called My Utmost for His Highest. I encourage you to read it if you haven't. But it's an allegory. It's a story, kind of follows the line of Song of Solomon. But right at the very beginning of the book, one of the companions that is given to the young maiden called Much Afraid that's trying to go to the mountaintop, one of the companions' names is Sorrow. And the other companion is Suffering. And the shepherd is the one that gave those companions to Much Afraid. Sorrow and suffering is our companion along the path. We learn how to navigate. It's a really interesting story, even as she moves through the path and everything. What she was interpreting as sorrow and suffering at the beginning, she gets a whole different perspective of in the future. So, and it's very true in my life as well. What I used to interpret as sorrow and suffering, I don't interpret it that way anymore. It's very much a blessing in my life. So I encourage you to have someone to help you walk through that. Okay, let's go ahead and move on through this. Number 3, have you ever had someone say, how's your prayer life? Or have you been praying much or something like that? Again, if we're not careful, we can look at prayer as being this list of things that we need to do, this task that we need to get on our to-do list. It says here in the Word that we are going to be faithful. The promise is that we are faithful in prayer. Now, what does that mean to you when you hear faithful in prayer? Talk a little bit about that if you want to, but there's definitely a space there for you to write down. What does it mean to you when you hear the words being faithful in prayer? Write down how you interpret that, how you think about that. Now, if you're like me, I used to interpret that as I needed to be faithful to pray. This verse was much more about prayer than it was about faith for me. I needed to be faithful in prayer, so I needed to be sure to pray a lot. And then I would find that I didn't have that fruit in my life, and so I would beat myself up and feel bad because, well, I'm not praying enough, Or I'd get all energized to be a strong Christian, and I'd start praying a whole lot. And that all of a sudden, I've got fruit in my life, and that means that I'm a strong Christian, But eventually it would begin to slip through my fingers, and before long, I would find that that wasn't really fruit. It was just something that I was trying to force happen in my life. But here, when it talks about being faithful in prayer, it kind of goes back to more like the concept of being joyful in hope. When we are faithful in prayer, it simply means that we believe that what we're praying about is going to come about. It's being faithful in our prayers. Does that make sense? Again, it's being faithful. It's believing that what's going to happen is going to come true that I'm praying about. It's the assurance of things hoped for, all right, and the evidence of things not seen that I'm praying about. I'm going to pray about this, and I'm going to be faithful in it. I'm going to believe that what I'm praying is actually coming true, as opposed to, Lord, we just ask that you would do this in your will and let your will be done. And we always I used to. You probably don't. You probably know others that do. But I'd always throw that little caveat in there, and Lord, just your will. Just in case it didn't happen, well, it's God's will. I have no idea what's going on. God's will just didn't. I guess God didn't want that to happen. I mean, how unfortunate to misrepresent God right there in that situation, in the midst of healing. So rather than being faithful in prayer, what I can become if I'm not careful is very passive in prayer. I have no responsibility in this thing. It's just, God, whatever you want to do, go ahead and do it. But I prayed, I prayed, and I can fill my days with prayer that has no faith in it. Now catch this. If I'm not careful, I can fill my days, I can fill my calendar with prayer that lacks faith. Have I really done a righteous activity? I prayed. I did the prayer. I prayed for an hour today, and I prayed for an hour each day this week, but did it have faith in it? Did you believe in what you were praying for? Or were you just praying to get a checkbox? Because your emphasis was more on the prayer than on the faithful in prayer. Now again, be careful not to get caught. Okay, now I'm going to go out and I'm going to pray, but I'm also going to add faith, and I'm going to believe. Guys, it doesn't happen that way. The faithfulness in the midst of prayer, that's fruit. That comes from learning how to think right, learning how to feel, learning how to believe, learning how to act. It's fruit that comes in my life. So if I don't feel like I have the measure of faith in my prayer, then I just need, just be aware of that. It's not that you're bad. Lord, I don't know if I have faith to pray for this new car, or for the rent this week, or for this relationship, or for this person to be healed, or for your revelation to come. Lord, I don't know if I have faith for that, but I want to have faith for that. Help me have faith for that, Lord. Help me expand my measure of faith so that my prayers can increase, so that my understanding and my hope can increase in my life. Expand that understanding, God, more and more. You guys kind of get that I'm constantly talking about, Lord, expand, Lord, increase capacity, Lord, help me grow. It's not just this linear path where, oh, I've already dealt with this, and now I'm here, and now I'm here, and now I'm here, and oh, no, I screwed up, and I go all the way back. It's a constant expansion going on in our life as we grow in our understanding. Okay? So there's our being faithful in prayer. Being faithful in prayer, not faithful to pray, but faithful in prayer. I'm going to believe that the things I'm saying will come true. And then finally, number 4, share with God's people who are in need. This is what hospitality is. It's simply finding a need and meeting it. How's that going? You know, a lot of times we can be so blinded because we're so focused on self, and that's where I was anyway, so focused on self and what I needed and what I wanted, I could walk right by somebody in need and not even notice it. But to help somebody in the midst of need, that's called hospitality. Hospitality isn't just throwing a nice party, okay, although it involves that. When you throw a party and you're welcoming people at the door and you've prepared your home and you have candy dishes, you know, and you've got the right music and you've got the atmosphere and you're talking, hello, how are you? You know, that's hospitality too. You're meeting a need for those people. But guys, hospitality as well is simply helping the poor. It's being hospitable. It's being open. You know, I don't know this for sure, but chances are pretty good that the word hospital comes, or the word hospitality comes from the word hospital, which, I don't know, there's a whole bunch of people that need things in the midst of a hospital. But hospitality is simply when we are meeting needs. So what we do when we come to a need is we share. Why do we share? Because we've been given. It's better to give to receive. When you give, you receive, so we share. As opposed to, if you're not careful, where I found myself so often was, I would be very negative in the midst of need. Either I would be negative because I needed things and it wasn't fair because I needed them and I wanted them and I wasn't getting it quick enough, or I would pass by somebody who had a need. I'd get mad at them. Have you found yourself ever doing that? Again, you're in a safe place. Raise your hand. Have you ever found yourself getting angry at somebody in need? Maybe a little brother, a little sister, maybe your children in a place of need, and we find ourselves getting angry with them. It's unfortunate, but it's very real. It's simply the Lord showing me my limits of being willing to share, my limits of being willing to be hospitable to others. I don't need to get offended at that. I just need to become aware of that. Lord, please forgive me and increase my ability to be hospitable. Lord, change the way I think about people in need so that my thoughts don't lead to certain feelings of getting angry, and then I believe that, well, they just need to do it for themselves, and that leads me to, so I'm not going to help them. All right? That kind of works really quickly when we come upon someone who may be in need. Or, okay, I'll help them once, that's good, but really? Do I got to help you 10 times? Come on. At some point, don't you need to pick it up and do it yourself? You know? And again, there may be a measure of truth in that, but the Lord tells me to share with others in need. He doesn't tell me to share once or share 2 times or share 3 times and then expect them to do it. There again, expectations. He says, Clay, I want you to share with others in need. I want you to be hospitable to others. Okay? So this is how we respond to people, to situations where there's a need. Hopefully you're even getting an opportunity in your experience right now to meet needs of people. And just meet needs of situations. I mean, you walk in, there's trash that needs to be picked up. Guys, the room needs to be picked up. Dishes that need to be washed. Clothes that need to be cleaned. You know? Paint that needs to be done. Boards that need to be mended. There's just things that need to be done. Are you finding that you're more one to get overwhelmed and angry at the need? Or are you more one to begin to share with others? Okay? Now again, the goal here is not for you to leave this session and go, I will now go meet others' needs, okay? Again, that's good, but you'll probably find yourself being pretty limited in being able to do that. What we do is simply say, Lord, I am able to meet needs. There are a measure of needs that I can meet because of the things that have been given to me right now in my life. There are other things that I can't meet right now because I haven't gotten there yet. I don't have the resources to meet those needs. But these I can meet. I can, within the measure of my faith, I can meet needs. Within the measure of my resources, I can meet needs. And if I can't, I don't need to feel guilty about that. I can just simply say, Lord, increase my resources in that area so I'll be able to meet that need in the future. I'm not going to get mad at myself. I'm not going to get mad at the person because they are making me think about my lack of resources to meet their need. Well, I don't have that either, and how come you're there? Just don't go there. That doesn't go anywhere good. Because what will happen eventually, you'll find yourself negative in the midst of need. Okay? So once again, our hope, our promise here is that we will begin to have the fruit of joy, patience, faithfulness, and helpfulness in our lives. It's fruit in our life, not just a list of things to do. It's fruit. Paul is talking here to the people in Rome, and he's going, guys, if you can get the revelation of Romans chapter 11, verse 33 through 36, then you will be able to walk around daily with this new thinking of Romans 12, verse 1 through 3, which will automatically produce the fruit of Romans chapter 12, verses 9 through 13 in your life. And there's more fruit too. I think it goes all the way down to verse 26, 27, something like that. All of that fruit. And we're not going to have time within our sessions here to go through every single one of those. But I do want you to know all of that is promised fruit in your life. Okay? It's not put these on your list of things to do today. It's promised fruit that's coming in your life. So a question for you to journal about, or a question for you to consider with others is, to what measure am I walking in that promise, in the fulfillment of that promise? Well, I don't feel like I'm really walking in that joy or in that faithfulness or in that patience. Okay, just ask for more of the promise. Lord, help me walk in more of that. Increase my capacity. Expand my understanding. You'll never be able to outlove God, okay? You'll never be able to love God more than the revelation that He loves you. So continue to ask Him, Lord, expand, increase. Hey, I've enjoyed this session. I hope it's done some good stuff to stir you up. Hopefully it's even added a little bit of pressure as we have experienced. Some of you have always heard this, but I say this. Hey, we'll see you in session 13.
How you think is the most important thing about you.